Hi everyone, David Aragona here for the December 4th edition of Horses to Watch, taking a look back at races from the last week, trying to find horses that encountered adversity in their trips and could be worth betting back or following in future starts. Well, we've got just dirt racing on the frontier for the rest of the Aqueduct meet as we stay in New York this week. I'll probably branch out to some other tracks in future weeks as I try to find trips because sticking with the dirt racing at Aqueduct, sometimes it's difficult to find interesting trips to talk about. I've got 2 weeks to pull replays from on this show, though, because I did not do a Horses to Watch episode last week for Thanksgiving. I hope everyone enjoyed their holiday, but I will go back to one replay from that weekend prior to Thanksgiving and then talk about a couple of replays from this past Saturday. And a theme among the dirt races I'm going to talk about on this episode are horses who had trouble at the start that really impacted their performances. And we'll get right into an example of that with the race from November 23rd, so a couple Saturdays ago at Aqueduct. The fifth race of the day was a maiden special weight event going 6 furlongs for the New York bred 2-year-olds. Break these runners from the gate, and the number 1 Roofer was a first-time starter who you can see just gets off about a length or two slow in here. Often you see this from first-time starters, especially breaking from the inside, waiting a long time in the starting gate in these large fields, just was not prepared for the break. And you could see the horse has speed. He tries to rush up after that slow break, but runs into a little bit of traffic about a furlong into the race. His jockey, Romero Mirage, has to tap on the brakes there. But you can see this horse is traveling pretty keenly down the backstretch, and he's going to make a pretty big middle move past the half-mile pole, heading into the far turn to try to get himself into the race. Just difficult to find success after having that trouble at the start, given the strength of the field that he was facing this day, because the top 3 finishers in this race all had positive prior racetrack experience, a couple of them coming out of a pretty fast maiden race won by the talented Kenny B. But you can see here, Roofer starting to make that move, has to angle off the rail to try to go around rivals pretty awkwardly there about the 3/8 pole, but does get out into the center of the racetrack, runs up into 4th here. Looks like for a brief moment like he might make an impact in the stretch of this race, but having to do all that work, making those 2 moves on the backstretch and then on the far turn, he pays the price for it late as he does fade a little bit through the final furlong of this race, actually getting caught from the back to ultimately finish 5th in here. But all in all, I thought this was a pretty positive first racetrack experience for Roofer that he should learn from after this. His trainer, Mitch Friedman, can win with a first-time starter, but not the kind of barn that has a lot of horses cranked up to always win their debut. So I do think this horse got the learning experience that he needs and should be fitter and more dialed in for the next time we see him. And if he gets off the inside, that could be ideal for a horse that I think has a lot more early speed that he was able to show in this race. He certainly should, given the fact that when he was purchased at auction earlier this year, he worked a furlong in 9 4/5 at the OBS June sale. I think we'll see a little bit more of that early speed next time out. Let's now move on a week later to the next Saturday at Aqueduct, November 30th. We'll talk about the third race from that day. It was another maiden special weight event. This one, though, for the older horses, Open Company, going at 6.5 furlongs. Let's break these runners from the gate. We're going to focus on a pretty lightly raced runner, the number 1 Letter Perfect, who is just making the second start of his career. And while he breaks with the field, just a little slow into stride. And right here, you're going to see he has to steady back pretty significantly. I'm not going to show the head on of this race, but when you do watch the head on, you'll see what happens. And horse just converge towards the inside rail, and he basically gets his path taken away from him. So his jockey, Ruben Silvera, has to tap on the brakes there. But you could see after that trouble, Letter Perfect gets pretty aggressive as he quickly runs right up in between horses to try to regain that lost position, getting up into the pocket to race in 3rd by the time they get to the far turn here. And from here, he gets a pretty good trip. It's just sitting on the inside. But this was his first time over a fast main track. He had debuted over a wet surface on debut at Saratoga many months ago, I believe, for the Christophe Clement barn that day. Here he was switching into the Rudy Rodriguez stable. And I just think, given the trouble he had at the start, never really was in position to win this race. You could see still staying in the pocket here as they pass the quarter pole and just can't really get off the inside. Now Ruben Silvera would ideally want to find a clear path for him, but just nowhere really to go. Questionable how much run he really has here. He does have to alter course in the stretch right there, and then doesn't really finish off the race in the final furlong. Ultimately will fade to finish last of 5 in here, but I don't think he ran the worst race of this field, given the trouble that he had coming out at the starting gate in that first furlong, then rushing up and having to alter course in the lane, and the fact that it was coming off a layoff. I just think you want to give this horse a pass for the last place finish in this race, and he's run a little better than it looks in both starts so far. Even going back to that debut race for the Clement barn at Saratoga, he was wide on August 1st against one of the strongest rail biases that we saw of the entire meet during the summer at Saratoga. So I think this horse has more ability than his results would indicate in these first two starts. And if you can gain some consistency and finally put two starts back to back coming back into the next month or so, I think he's one that we will see improvement from, and possibly also showing more early speed the next time that he makes a racetrack start. Let's actually move on to the very next race of the day on that Saturday, November 30th card. The fourth race was a maiden special weight event, this one for the New York bred 2-year-olds going the 1 mile distance. And I want to focus on a first-time starter, the number 3 Runnamore, who was making his debut going that demanding mile route distance. Let's break these runners from the starting gate, and you'll see Runnamore breaks about a length slowly. You'll see him right there on the right of the field. He's going to be highlighted in a moment, just breaking a little bit behind the field. But moving down the backstretch, you'll see that this horse actually has more early speed that he was allowed to show here, because he gets pretty aggressive under Jose Lezcano. And you could see pretty much a furlong into the race, Lezcano's got to take a hammerlock hold on this horse to prevent him from running up on the heels of those ahead of him. And he just wants to do more than he's being allowed to do. And you don't want to see this from a 2-year-old in any debut race, but especially not when you're trying to go a mile first time out. To be fighting the rider like this for the first half of the race is just not ideal to being able to save enough energy to finish off a race. And you'll see Runnamore does eventually fade towards the end of this 1 mile heat, but I still think he runs pretty well, considering the fact that he is just not really settling for the first half mile. And then as they move around the far turn here, he continues to travel pretty well in the bridle. This was a race that was won from just off the pace by the horse who's actually positioned to the outside of him here, New Matthew. And while the horses coming into this race hadn't necessarily shown a whole lot on the dirt, there are plenty of horses switching surfaces, or those that had shown some hints of talent but hadn't really delivered on the racetrack yet. I think this might be a race that ultimately pans out to be better than it looked like it would be coming in. Some horses in this race that I do think have a little bit of talent. And Runnamore, you can see right here, hanging on his left lead and upper stretch, switches over to the right lead right there, but still hard to handle. Looks like he's trying to lug in under Lezcano, who's going to the left-handed crop, trying to keep him straight. But you can see even through the stretch here is that he's keeping a straighter course. Lezcano just unable to really ride him, just handling him very tentatively coming onto the finish line. Probably knew he wasn't going to get in the trifecta or superfecta by this point, so doesn't really have to persevere with him. But still a horse that I think just got a good education on debut and probably wasn't fully cranked up to put forth his best effort this day. And that's typical of what we see from the Linda Rice barn. She's not a trainer who typically gets these first-time starters ready to fire their best, most professional race on debut. And we typically do see her improve horses in their second and third starts after they get some experience under their belts. So I do believe that Runnamore is better than what he showed first time out. He's by run happy. There's actually a little more sprint pedigree on the dam side. His dam is a half sister to De Stoops, who was a multiple stakes winning sprinter from the early 2000s. So I wouldn't be surprised if this horse ultimately turns back in distance. Maybe this was just a means to an end race, something that we do often see from the Linda Rice barn. But I do believe that Runnamore is better than the result that he achieved first time out. Those are all the replays to look at on this episode of Horses to Watch. If you want to follow any of these horses moving forward, you can add them to your horse watch on DRF.com and get email notifications when these horses are entered back in the future. You can also go into your DRF formulator or Timeform USPPs, open up the notes function, and make your own written notes about these trips or any other trips that you see when you're watching replays. And those written notes that you make will show up in the horses' running lines of their past performances when they are entered back in future races. Everybody, thanks for tuning in to Horses to Watch this week, and I'll be back with another batch of replays to analyze next Wednesday.
Hey, let me give you a hot tip. If you liked the content that you've seen before, click on the like and subscribe button right here. And of course, for more DRF videos like Race of the Days, Stakes previews, click on the videos right here.